here. We'll get started. So we are at week 3 now. I'll share my screen and share some of my slides. All right, so at this point, we've sort of like done, I think, a decent amount of the intro to our class here. I think everyone's sort of, I don't know how you're feeling, but I sort of get the sense that people are sort of like maybe a little bit exhausted of just playing with models. So we're going to start this week. We're going to look at 2 things. We're going to look at chaining, which is a really cool feature of Runway that I think actually makes Runway like far more usable than maybe many other machine learning tools would be. Chaining is just a way to like use a bunch of different models in one workspace. So it really shows the power of workspaces and allows you to do stuff that would be really, really hard to do with just a regular old server setup. So we'll do a demo on that. And then I think we'll spend most of this week talking about data sets. So in prep for next week, where we will be training around StyleGAN model, ideally everyone has their own data set that they can start training with by next week. So I would say, if you haven't started thinking about that, definitely start thinking about this week. I'm happy to help people with scraping or doing whatever we need to do. I'm going to show a demo of scraping Instagram because it's fairly straightforward. This isn't really supposed to be a technical class where you guys learn how to write code and how to write scrapers. So this will be probably one of the easier ones that I can show you. But if you don't feel comfortable like digging into that sort of stuff yourself, let me know. I know Matthew hit me up last night or the night before, like with, hey, here's a website that I don't think is scrapable, like in ways that I've seen, like, is there something we can do? I was able to write a really simple scraper in like an hour and generate and grab a bunch of images for him. So I'm happy to do that for anybody. If you have a website where you're interested in things, I'm happy to walk through that. Matthew, I know I haven't sent it to you yet, but I will
Thank you.
tonight. Yeah, of course. And I'm also happy to like walk anyone through like what I did. So obviously, like, there's a time crunch here where people might just be like, I don't know if I can get this done in a week. Can you help me? But then I also know that everyone wants to learn how to do things like this. So I have a bunch of videos online that you're welcome to watch that sort of walk through different sort of scraping different sites. I'm going to do one on basically the process I did for Matthews probably this week if I can get to it. So I'm also happy to like help walk you through the steps that I did just so you can learn a little bit as well and learn how the process works. So yeah, this isn't necessarily a class where I want to force you all to learn how to write web scrapers, but if you are interested in learning it, just let me know and I can walk you through some more deeper like sort of steps for those sort of things. So I expect us to mostly talk about data sets tonight. We'll take a look at training really quickly, but it'll mostly be around data sets. Yeah, cool. This is basically what we're going to do this week. We'll discuss some projects if people want to add some stuff to the Slack channel of things they made this week. I know people were probably a little busy this week, but if you did add stuff or make things, I'm happy to walk through it and talk about it. And then we'll just do a chaining demo. We'll take a little break and then we'll look at data sets mostly for the second half of class. Yeah, cool. Let me just see if anyone added anything to our Slack channel. Cool, okay. So no one added anything, which is totally fine. I'm just interested, did anyone get to play with sort of either vector inputs or style transfers? Or did you play with anything else you want to discuss or talk about? I'm happy to hear what people are working on this week. Cool, that is not a problem. I understand everyone's busy this week and it's been a crazy week. Matthew, can I show the stuff that you were asking me about and just sort of walk through like sort of what I did for folks?
That's totally fine.
Cool, awesome. Okay, so Matthew posted in here that he found this website that is the Scottish Register of Tartans, which I thought was really cool. I've never seen this before. And this site is just, it is a list of, I guess, textile patterns that are, the traditional Scottish sort of patterns you'll see. So on this site, there's just a list of A to Z, and it seems like there's either the name of the tartan pattern itself or like the name of the person who produced it or something. I'm not very familiar with this. So Matthew, if you are, let me know. But what I like is like, so there's a list of patterns here, and then you click on one of these lists, and then this has an individual pattern in it. So if you click on this, it just loads to an image. So like this is a perfect sort of setup for doing some web scraping. It's not the easiest because there's no like way to like auto download a bunch of stuff, but because of how the structure is set up, it's fairly straightforward. So there's a list here with each page where it has, you know, A, if you click on B, the URL switches to B. Then when you click on one of these, it gives you at the top here a reference link, which is basically an ID for this sort of pattern. And then it gives you a pattern, the pattern image here. And if you open this image in a new tab, you'll see that the way this pattern is produced, if you just look at the URL here, is here's again the reference ID and then a height and a width. So this is really cool because I think what was really great with this is I was able to just play with this. I was able to manipulate this to be 1024 by 1024. And it still generated like a pretty decent image. I think there were other options and some of the other patterns that I sort of pulled from, but basically this is now like, so, okay, so what I need to do is I need to go through, you know, if I walk through this sort of step by step, what I would do manually is I would go through each one of these links and I would like maybe copy the link address, and then I would like pull out that reference ID, and then I would like put that in this URL pattern and I would like paste it in here, right? So doing that with, there must be 5,000 patterns on this site. Doing that with 5,000 patterns manually would take me a long, long time, right? So when Matthew showed me this, I was just able to really quickly look at it and sort of figure out a way to use a thing called Beautiful Soup, which is like a really common web scraper. So the way this web scraper works is, let's see here. So I don't expect anyone to know what this code means, but I can just walk you through what each of these does. So first off, you load in some code that allows you to do stuff. I set up some, if you're familiar with coding, these are just sort of arrays like you would see in JavaScript. In Python, they're called lists. All it says is like, hey, I want to start collecting a bunch of subpages and I want to collect image links. And then all we do is we go through that first URL. So I go through this URL, sorry, this one. And I noticed that it's just string A, B, you know, all the way through Z. So all this does is it generates a list of A through Z letters, and then it loops through that list of letters and it says, okay, load this page with whatever letter you need, and then go through each one of these links and grab the ID from it. So down here, it's basically saying like, grab that link, and then just grab the number or the reference number. That then gets stored into a text file. Although I might not actually use that text file, but basically it saves it in case I need to use it again. And then all it does is it takes that link, which I showed you sort of at the end there, which is that image generation link. Let me make this a little bigger. So it just takes that link, and all it does is where that, that ID was, that reference ID, it just pastes that in here. And you'll see it, so it generates all these images. So when this runs, it then saves out those images and it saves them out to a place that is, let me find it really quickly here. So just saves it out with that reference ID. So you'll see here, I believe there's 3,000 images or so, and each of these is a different pattern. So, you know, I know obviously like have done this before, so I kind of know what I'm doing. This took me about 45 minutes to write. And it took about 2 hours to download 3,000 images, but I was able to get them down relatively easily. So this is basically the process that I go through for web scraping. This is for like a custom website. This one happened to be really, really easy. There are other ones that are much harder. This happened to be a pretty straightforward example of this. So that's just to give you an idea of like, if you want to build your own data set in the future and you have a website that has all these images, it's really easy for us to potentially like write something to pull down those images. I should note that this probably, I don't want to say it crashed their server, but it probably hit their server a little bit hard. I did notice that at some point they shut me off and then I had to restart it. So, you know, be kind. I generally will set these to just grab like 250 at a time or whatever. In this case, it's a government site. I'm sure that their servers are set up fine. And also these images are really small. They're like, you know, 300K per image. So, you know, I downloaded a couple megabytes in total of images, whereas there's other sites where you might be downloading gigabytes and that might really hit their traffic hard. So, you know, have to be aware of that, but it's fine. You know, I think I would just love to see people what Matthew or other folks could come up with this data set. So I think it's a really interesting idea. Yeah, so again, like if you have ideas, like Matthew had a great idea and it was just like, could I scrape this? And like we figured out how. So please feel free if you have other ideas of hey, there's a bunch of images here I want to work with. How do I get them? You know, again, I think we talked about this, some of this more at the end of this class, but like think about the ethics of grabbing a bunch of images from someone's data site. You know, this happens to be a site that is almost research-based and like asking people to like look at all these patterns and images. So I feel pretty good about that. But, you know, if you're taking stuff from government servers with content that may not be allowed for you to grab, like, let's think about that before we do it, before the FBI knocks on either of our doors. But yeah, I mean, this is basically the process of like grabbing lots of images all at once, is figuring out what the pattern is for grabbing them, writing a little bit of code to do that pattern matching, and then pulling them down. Yeah, so we'll look at a little bit more later tonight about that work. Cool, anyone else want to talk? Now that I've talked a little bit, anyone else ready to talk about stuff they worked on or stuff they're thinking, even stuff you're thinking about working on? All right, silence is fine, no worries. Anton, did you?
Yeah, I mean, I still want to I need to search some hashtags. I am still interested in maybe some kind of camo generative machine learning. I'm also interested in like maybe some other like patterns in that vein. I talked to an artist friend of mine who has a very distinct style that's uniform, and I was like, hey, would you care if I mined your Instagram, because I think he has enough on there and he's done it for long enough where it would work. And he was like, that's really weird, but it sounds cool. Okay. So I have a few things I'd like to try. I think those few things. And then yeah, I tried a little bit. I mean, I've watched the videos you sent and I didn't install anything, but you know, tried to figure out what was going on a bit.
Cool. Yeah, and we'll talk about installing stuff later when we do the datasets demo as well. So I'm happy to walk people through that. This is like definitely the most technical class of the session. So I'm totally aware that like lots of people are not used to using terminal or whatever. So if you are struggling or just want to like walk through stuff, I'm happy to set up like a video chat and we can just walk through it over screen share like together or whatever. So if it is something that you have a really good idea and you just want to like figure out how to set it up, like just let me know. And also I'd say like, if you're like, this is just not my wheelhouse and like, I want to play with it, but I don't really feel comfortable doing all this stuff, just let me know. And it's like, it probably doesn't take me very long to download some of these stuff for you. So we'll just put it up on a Google Drive and share files with you if you're interested in it. So just let me know what you need help with, and I'm happy to work with you on that. Cool. Yeah, I think patterns and fabric patterns are really, really cool because there do tend to be a lot of websites or like, you know, even books that make that stuff available. So, you know, if you want a really arduous project for yourself, like find a pattern book and like scan all those patterns in. Definitely take you a long time, but it's like it's a very cool thing. And like, if those patterns are not on the web, like it's like a very special project that like no one else will ever have access to a data set before. So definitely worth thinking about. Cool. Okay, so why don't I just jump into the first demo, which is just walking us through using chaining inside Runway. So basically what chaining does is it allows you to combine multiple projects or multiple models together, and you can sort of do some cool almost feedback looping effects and other things. So let me just walk you through how like I would go ahead and start to make one of these. So the way to do chaining is really important that it is all in your same workspace. I am a messy workspace person, so I'm gonna go in here and just clean up my workspace a little bit, just so I'm not having millions and millions of things in here. Just want to get it to a place where I have some black space at the bottom here. All right, there we go. Okay, so basically the really, really important thing to remember with chaining is that as you chain each of these models, they're essentially stacking, right? So the first model you use can be sort of whatever, but the output of that model determines what your next model's input has to be. So in the case of, say, something like where you're outputting text from your first model, your next model's input has to be text. If it isn't, it's just not going to work. So make sure that whatever you're doing when you're chaining your models together, are that your inputs and outputs match in a way that is helpful. So we're gonna look at a little bit of that right now. So I think the thing that I wanna play with is I'm gonna play with, so let's use attention GAN, which is a model we've used before. So let's add this to a workspace. So now we're here. I'm gonna delete this one from here. So how does attention GAN work? So remember that attention GAN takes in an input, so it takes in text, and its output is an image, right? So that means the next thing I want to do is I want to have an image input model. So let's think about what those might be. So if I come in here and I go to my models and I look at my categories, I could use image synthesis, I could use post-processing. Text-based isn't really going to work for me because I want something that has images. So I think what I might try to do is let's look at something like big ByGAN. So if we go in big ByGAN. So remember that what big ByGAN does, and I think some folks played with this last week or the week before, big ByGAN takes in an image and it tries to find another matching image or the closest matching representation inside the big GAN model. So let's go ahead and add this one in our workspace. So now I've got a model that takes text and is going to generate an image. I have that image that is then going to plug into big ByGAN. And so now the next thing is this is also going to be an image. So let's try to do one more thing here, which is let's take, let's find like a classifier. So a classifier takes in an image and then tells you what it sees in that image. So let me see where classifiers would be. I think it's in recognition. Those are bounding boxes. I just want like captions. Here we go. So there's one called image text. This is one I was looking for. This, this model produces a image, or it produces text from an image, right? So it's going to take in an image and then it's going to provide a caption for it. So let's go ahead and add that to my model. So now what I'm working with here is I'm working with a model that takes in a text, produces an image, finds an image and produces an image next to that, right? So it like is finding the nearest image, and it's going to take that image and it's going to produce a caption for it. So let's see how this works. The nice thing about Runway also is that you can start all your models all at once. So let's just fire this up and we will see how it goes. I don't want to do that. I want to do this in remote. That seems like a new change there. Let's also run this one in remote. There are options to run these models locally if you have a, like if you're in an Ubuntu Linux machine, which most of us aren't. So, but apparently for whatever reason, it's set that to CPU. Now it's running these all, it's gonna run them all remotely and charge me whatever the 5 cents per minute or whatever it is. So now we can come over here and we can start all models. So this is just going to start them all up. I'm gonna put in, while attention GAN starts up, I'm gonna put in a model here that, I'm gonna put in my little dog on the beach chasing a ball. So there is my dog on the beach chasing a ball. It clearly doesn't look like that at all, but that's what's there. So now when I switch to big ByGAN, you'll see it's looking for an input. So when I come down here, I can set my input to camera or file, which is what we've done previously, or I can set it to attention GAN. So that means it's going to take the attention GAN model input. So now it's bringing in this image, and you'll see it's processing. And now this is what it found to be the nearest image to this other weird abstract image, right? So like, I still see the beachy thing. I definitely don't really see a dog, but let's see what happens. So now I'm gonna go to my next model, which is image to text. And here I'm gonna choose my input as big ByGAN. Now this should generate a caption. So look at what this one came up with. So this one's decided that what it sees here is a person on a beach with a Frisbee. So sort of a game of telephone, right? So it's like, we started with a dog, we ended up with, you know, sort of the big ByGAN model, and then we ended with a person on the beach with a Frisbee. So now let's do something where let's take this text and let's paste this back into the top of the attention GAN model. So let's take the text that it found here and let's paste this back up over here. So person on a beach with a Frisbee, there's our person on the beach. Here is the person that on the beach that Big Bygan found. And here is what the image to text model found. A couple of people on a beach with a kite. So like you can see, like we could repeat this over and over again, right? So let's try it one more time. So let's take this and let's paste this in. There are people on the beach with their kite. There is our sky, I guess now, with something in the sky, maybe a UFO. And then let's see what this looks like. A group of people, wait, is this right? Okay, I'm just gonna do, just to double check, I'm gonna turn this off and then on again and see. Okay, I don't know how it gets a beach from this scene because there's clearly no people here. But you know, again, so like this is sort of what's interesting, right? Is like, what is it really seeing here? This could be, you know, this could be a project around just like the absurdity of machine learning, or like just maybe a fun game of telephone. Like you can imagine like letting your friends almost be a part of this, right? Like your friend could put in text and then, you know, at the very end, you respond with this response and it changes a little bit over time. So this is like a really, just really interesting part of chaining, right? So like we get some like sort of new ways to play with these models in a way that we wouldn't really have by themselves, right? So like this sort of feedback loop process is something that we couldn't really do with just the attention GAN model itself, right? You might just try to be like, you know, people on the beach flying kites. And you might just try to like tweak the images every time just to sort of see if you can change things. But like in a model by itself, you can't really do like that much. Like smiling people on the beach flying kites. Okay, so this is what's really interesting about like just sort of using the model, the chaining model that is available to you inside Runway. Now, this is obviously like kind of a weird use case because you're doing this sort of like echo, like sort of feedback loop kind of thing. But there are also really good reasons that you might want to do this just from like a purely workflow production standpoint. So for the moment, I'm just going to stop all these models, and then I'm going to delete the image to text model, and I'm going to add in one of our super resolution models. So those, I believe, are in post-processing. So super resolution, we'll use SRFBN. Super resolution upreses images using a machine learning model. So if you've ever done stuff in Photoshop where you try to like make an image larger using the Photoshop like image size tool, you know, it gets a little bit blurry and does some other things. These models are like slightly better than that. Like I would not say that they're like perfect, but they will get you a better result than you would get through through something like Photoshop. So I'm going to add this to my workspace and I'm going to fire up all these models again. All right, so now we're running. So let's go in here and let's choose something a little bit different this time. So let's say a red bird sat on a tree. Okay, so there is our red bird sitting on a tree. We're still going to pipe this into Big Bygan. And you'll see we get a very different image. That's pretty drastically different. I actually see more of a bird here than I did before. Now, what you'll notice is that the output of this model is 256 by 256. So up here, attention GAN is also 256 by 256. I don't really know why this is deleting or clearing out this path here. Anyway, so 256 by 256 for the output size. When we go to Big Bygan, we see the same thing. Interestingly, the image changed a lot here. And now when we go to SRFBN, we're going to switch our input to Big Bygan. You'll see that now our model doubled in size. So now it's 512 by 512. So if I actually want to change that, I can change that inside of Runway by just switching to the 4x model. So let's say I want these images to be larger. So I can switch this to 4x and then hit run remotely again. This particular setting has to be changed while your machine is off. So now I have a 1024 model. Now, if I download this image, and save it to my desktop, like I promise you, if you open it in Photoshop, it will still be a little blurry and still be a little bit noisy, but it's better than if you were to try to go from the big ByGAN model and to download this directly and trying to res it up just using traditional Photoshop. So this is actually a case of where, like, let's say you're doing a little web art project and you want to produce like higher res like background images. You might actually want to pipe it in through like a sRFBN, so you get higher like resolution, less like pixelated background images. So there are some like workflow use cases to do chaining that can be pretty helpful. So that's chaining. I do think it's actually like one of the nicer features of Runway. To do this using like Colab or like a machine learning model on a server is pretty annoying. You have to like set up a lot of like hooks to like pull things back and forth from things. So they've made a nice way for you to add a bunch of stuff together. So this is also, I think I showed that Janelle Shane piece last week where she was reading in Star Wars videos, creating segments from them, and then using those segments to generate new images from it. Essentially what that would look like, let's stop all these models and I can pull that up and really quickly and show you what that would look like. So let's just delete this one too. So what that one would be is, I believe it's called Deep Lab. Yeah, it's, semantic image segmentation and labeling. And then the output was, I believe, Spade. And probably Spade Cocoa. Those three Spade models you see here, if I go back and type this in, Spade Face will generate faces from segments. Spade Cocoa will generate like objects from segments, and then Spade Landscapes will obviously generate landscapes from different images. So actually, let's just come back here and let's take a look at how we would use this. So let's say that we want to, let's just use a file input for this. Open the image. And we can just grab this image again. Actually, let's grab, yeah, that'll work. Let's go ahead and hit run remotely. And then we'll set the input for this to be Deep Lab v3. So kind of interesting in that it didn't really find a whole lot because it sort of found the background to be all black. There could be ways that we could change this. We could maybe play with, you know, setting the brightness a little bit lower. That's interesting. It doesn't really do a whole lot. Let's try saturation. So this particular image maybe just doesn't work really great with this because of just the kind of image it is. But if we look at it in sort of Spade Cocoa and we hit run remotely here, so it's also worth noting if you wanted to look up these models, MobileNet is a different type of model than Cocoa is. So these are essentially data sets. MobileNet is probably trained on like smaller mobile images, or maybe the way, in particular way in which the network is built, that it's going to look for things a little bit differently. So these two things are not going to match up one-to-one, right? It's not going to just translate right back to it because they're different data sets. So here, interesting, it looks like it made like a taxi or something. That's actually pretty cool. Like that's a pretty nice image. It's like definitely a taxi in the fog, just from this particular weird grayscale image. So, you know, again, there's lots of different interesting ways to play with these models to try to generate new things from each of these. So I think chaining is pretty cool. I've yet to really see people like really harness the power of it, but I think it'll be pretty interesting to see what folks can play with it. So I think it's totally worth playing around with and sort of seeing what happens there. Any questions about chaining? I should mention, you are being charged per model during this time. So remember, it's 5 cents a minute. So while both of these models are on, I'm being charged 10 cents a minute total. So it can get pretty expensive. So just be aware of that. It's also worth knowing that you can do exports directly from this. So if you export, interesting, I think it's this one that you want to export from. You can actually do multiple exports and export all of your files through the system. So it also could help you, you could generate a bunch of images, but again, it's also going to cost you a certain amount. for all those images you're going to produce.
What's the most you've chained together at once?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I haven't really done a lot of it myself, like in my own work, but I've definitely like you could do 5 models. I think is their limit at any one time. I don't think you get more models than 5 on at any one time. But yeah, so something between 3 to 5 is usually like pretty common, and I will sometimes use that like that SRFBN, that super resolution network, at the end just to sort of get some higher res images out of it at the end.
Cool.
Cool. All right, so that's sort of chaining. So that's what's going to cover that. Why don't we start talking about data sets? Because I think that that's probably where we'll spend most of the week or most of the day discussing. So we'll take a little bit of break once I go through some slides, but we'll get started with doing some data set stuff. So I haven't really talked about this before, but I really think that like data sets are like the most creative part of machine learning art. I think you've already sort of seen that like working with other people's models can be fairly limiting, right? Because there's only so much that you can do within someone else's model. But generating your own data set allows you to think a lot more creatively, and you have a lot more flexibility in sort of like what you want to make. So I think like, I have wavered in how much I focus on data sets in this particular intro class. But I do really think they're like a really, really interesting opportunity for artists in particular to think about machine learning and to play with stuff. So I'm really excited to sort of see what everyone makes. There's sort of a bunch of different approaches to data sets. And everyone sort of approaches them in their own way. The first is define pre-made data sets. That can just basically be like, there's a bunch of sites on the internet that have data sets. You download a zip and you bring them in and either train them yourself or you just use a pre-existing model. That's pretty easy to do. Again, it is sort of like limiting in the sense that you're working with someone else's curated data set. And I'll also say that sometimes those data sets are not the cleanest. So, just give some thought to like what you could find and what you want to work with. So I actually think a case of like what Matthew found is like, was a data set that sort of exists on the internet, but no one had scraped it before, but it's also like pretty interesting in that like it had definitely existed and no one's used it yet. So I would be really interested to sort of see what that is. So that's sort of the second bullet, which is like scrape your own. We'll talk a little bit more about scraping in the next couple minutes, but essentially scraping your own is like you find either a website or multiple websites that have really interesting images. You figure out how to pull those down. And those could be like writing your web scraper. It could just be a manual process of just downloading a bunch of images. I have definitely just downloaded a bunch of images before. I've heard from multiple people that this is like a very like therapeutic sort of Zen process. Like on a weekend, you're gonna be like watching TV or like hanging out with your kids and like they're off playing and you just want to keep one eye on them and you can like just go through a website and just click download, save image, download, save image. It's totally a valuable, like it's a process. And I sort of have jokingly said that sometimes I'm the machine and my job is just download all these images. So those are totally viable points, especially if you're not like super technically inclined. There's nothing wrong with just downloading 1,000 images and just, going through a site and just clicking and downloading all them. I mentioned this earlier, but you could also scan and photograph your own. That is like next level world. There's actually, I don't know if it's in this deck. I'll share a link to it when class is over, but there's an artist who is both a 3D modeling artist, but also a photographer, an artist who draws like figure drawing. So he created his own model that would take his figure drawing sketches and convert them to like almost 3D rendered bodies, or like he had like a photo studio. So he had got perfectly lit people and he would draw those two together. So then he could generate any sketch from hand and have it rendered into a 3D modeled or like perfectly rendered and photographed and lit person. There are very, very few of us who have all those skills combined and have access to like a perfect lighting studio. But that's like next level. If you really, really want to get into this stuff, you will find that like really, really well curated and well generated data sets do produce slightly better work. For this class, I just want people to have fun and just sort of generate stuff, but know that like the better your data set is, the more likely your art is to to like feel like realistic or be interesting as well. And that's also part of this too, is like, you know, it sort of gets to like, do you want to do realism with your art, which is like, you know, so there's like models inside Runway that are called what's called FFHQ, which is it was trained on 50,000 images of people's faces pulled from Flickr. And those basically will regenerate like almost perfect looking faces. You know, my personal work doesn't really work with realism. My personal work is like more abstract and those sort of things. So it becomes, you know, what sort of data set do I want to build to make some of these more abstract patterns and that sort of thing. So a lot of this comes down to like, again, it's sort of like, what is your curatorial style? What are the things you want to produce? Data sets are the way to that. So that's why data sets are really, really important to machine learning and machine learning art in particular. So my usual recommendation is that if you're looking for a particular thing, your first like search is just to go to Google and see if there's anything existing, right? So if you type in shoes data set, I'm pretty sure you'll find at least a couple of shoe data sets. Now, one of the problems is that they might be low resolution. Like I can think of there's one data set particular that has like 20,000 photographs of shoes that I think were pulled from like Zappos, but they're all like 256 pixels, right? They're like pretty low res. So maybe that works for you if you just want to try and demo something. Maybe it doesn't, depending what you're trying to do. But I always go to Google first because more than likely someone has done something and you can at least see what they've done, even if you don't want to use that exact data set. There are a number of very, very well-known data sets along the internet. These are a handful of them. These are names you might hear if you like are hanging out on machine learning forums or if you just like watch some machine learning videos. There is a data set called ImageNet that is one of the big like classified, there's like something like 10,000 categories of that. That's actually where horses to zebras comes from. There are, I think, like 150 horses and like 200 zebras in that data set. It is semi-public in the sense that like you have to create a login to be able to download stuff. And it's run by, I believe it's run by Stanford or Cornell, one of those two. So it can be pretty slow. So you can download all the images from it. So if you're looking for animal images or object images, you might want to start there. All these are linked to if you want to go and check them out after class. Sci-Far 10 is also a bunch of categories that is, again, like there's probably like 1,000 different categories for those. Sci-Far 10, it's worth noting, are pretty low res. I believe they're 128 pixels. So it's pretty small. You might want to stick that through like in a super resolution network to like get bigger ones. But it does exist if you want. MNIST is sort of the famous one that everyone does their very first machine learning project on. It is handwritten digits. So if you've ever wondered how your bank is able to read your like really bad handwriting when scanning a check, this is how. MNIST is all black and white numbers. So lots of people do stuff with that. FFHQ is one I talked about earlier. It is high resolution. So high resolution meaning 1024 by 1024 images of faces, all pulled from Flickr. So they're not like, I would say actually if you go through that data set, they're fairly weird looking photographs that are like all cropped in a certain way. And they're not like, they're not perfectly well lit. Like a lot of them are very much look like, you know, just amateur photographers put them up on Flickr. Celeb A is also faces. It is, however, all celebrities. So you will find that most of these public data sets have like legal requirements and or like weird issues with copyright. FFHQ uses Flickr and uses the Creative Commons setting within Flickr to make sure that they have all of the legal requirements to remix images or use these images. Celeb A took the approach of technically it's legal to use celebrities' images because they're celebrities. So that's what that one has done. The funny thing about Celeb A is it was built, I want to say in like 2005 or 2006. And someone went through and categorized all the pictures of George Bush in them. And there's something like I think like 10% of the data set is George Bush. Because obviously he was the president at that time. So, you know, all of these data sets contain biases when they were built, where they were pulled from, those sort of things. So, you know, be aware of those if you want to use these. So Celeb A is pretty outdated. You'll probably see a lot of like Brad Pitt, Jennifer Aniston, and George Bush in that data set. LFW is labeled faces in the wild. That is another sort of face data set. You'll find that many researchers use face data sets because they're very easy to make look really cool, right? Seeing people's faces morph from one to another is like a thing that all of our human brains are trained to be like wowed by. So lots of face data sets. So label faces in the wild, I believe, is like pretty low res, but they're also labeled, which means they have attributes. Like I think there might be some stuff around like hair length or eye color or other things. So if you're interested in labeling, which we can't really do in StyleGAN, but if you are interested in sort of seeing what that looks like, you can download that model and sort of look at it. There is a list of public image data sets. This was made by Golan Levin, who is a professor at CMU. And it's just sort of an open source list. We can take a look at it right now. It's just a Google like file of just a bunch of different images. You will see here that each of them links to a page, and then it has some notes or remarks about things. Some of these are things like, so MNIST exists here. This is the link to MNIST. There's also some really fun stuff like the Bottle Cap Club. Like this is actually a list of bottle caps. Apparently their convention was canceled due to coronavirus, which sucks, but there are a number of bottle caps in this website. So similar to what I showed you with Matthew's scraper, where we scraped the tartan patterns, we could do the same thing here and just scrape a bunch of bottle caps. Who knows what we would end up with? I think these are also fairly low resolution. I don't think they're much bigger than this image. Let's see. Yeah, so they look to be about, maybe about 400 pixels at the largest. So just something to be aware of. We'll talk about that a little bit more next week about, my recommendation is for this week to try to get as high resolution of images as possible. If you've got anything larger than 1024 by 1024, you don't need anything larger than that. But in a lot of cases, because we are scraping the web, there's lots of stuff where there's like smaller images. So we'd try to get as big as you can. We can talk about whether you should use something like super resolution to res them up, or just deal with the size you have. We'll talk about that a little bit more next week, but I just say for now, try to get as high resolution as you can. If you have anything smaller than 256 by 256, it probably won't work that well. So I'd say like that's maybe the minimum size, and then the maximum size is 1024 or larger. So as I was mentioning, like this is just there's a ton of stuff on here. You're welcome to like dig through it and see what exists. You're welcome to Google or like find your own thing. There are like just there's some cool stuff in here that I've like barely like scratched the surface on. And people do add to it fairly often. I think I added something to it recently, which was like feathers, or like there's a data set of feathers somewhere in here. You'll see on the left-hand column here, they also tell you how many images are in that data set. So, we're sort of looking for something that's in the range of 1,000 images, but it's kind of up to you. You can go lower, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend going lower than 500. So it's about the right number. Yeah. So that public list works. You could download all those. Let me know if you want me to help you write a scraper or something for it. In some cases, there are download links for those, so you can try those as well. So scraping, there's a couple different directions you can take with this. There are some Chrome extensions, which are pretty nice and fairly easy. There's one for Pinterest called Pin Down. I believe it costs $2 now, but it costs $2, so that's like not that big of a deal. There's also a couple Google Images Chrome extensions, and these allow you to just sort of like quickly download images using a Chrome extension. They will work. I will say Google Images should be maybe your last resort for finding images, because it's very noisy. And we'll talk about what that means in a minute, but essentially noise means you might get lots of duplicate images in it, or you might get images that don't actually represent the data set you want. And in many of these cases, you will have to like hand clean them. So you don't want to download 3,000 images and have to go through each one individually and decide whether or not to keep it. Pinterest kind of has the same issue, but it's usually the search filters are a little bit better, and they won't be showing as many repetitive images. So just keep that in mind as you work through these, that some of these will give you a lot, like they seem easy because there's a Chrome extension, but you might have to do a lot more work on the back end to clean them up. And then there are some command line stuff, like this class doesn't require you to know how to use the command line, but I do have some tutorials here on using Instagram, which we'll walk through today actually, as well as scraping Flickr. So if you are interested in those topics, there are videos and tutorials for those. And if you have other questions about that, just let me know, I'm happy to help. So these exist. There's also options to do something like custom, like I helped write for Matthew. So if you're interested in some of that, just let me know. So I think right now sounds like a good time to take a break, and then we'll come back and we'll do the Instagram scraper. So why don't we come back at right on the hour? So that's 8 o'clock here on the East Coast, whatever the next hour is for the rest of you on other time zones. So let's come back in 6 minutes. Cool? All right, see everybody in 6 minutes. If you need a dose of happiness, my partner and I got a new cat this weekend, and she is learning to walk in grass for the first time. You guys see her? So she clearly doesn't know how to walk in grass. So like she like does it very gingerly and like doesn't know how to step over it. It's been the highlight of my day so far. So yeah, hope that brightens your day too. And my other cat is trying to pick on her right now. So this is going to be fun to try to teach while I have cats screaming across from me. Where'd she sit? Okay. No? All right. Okay, so anyway, oh, I should also mention there is a datasets channel inside of the Slack channel. So there's a channel here called Datasets. Folks do kind of tend to share stuff when they find things. So you might find, if you might want to scroll through this and find some things that like sort of strike your fancy or whatever. This is the feather one that I was thinking of. So you're interested in a bunch of feathers, you can go ahead and grab that data set. Looks like someone just put up a bunch of artwork from Behance. So like there's some other cool things in here. Yeah, so you can always go through the site and try to find stuff if you are interested. Okay, so why don't I'll walk through how to scrape Instagram. I think that'll be just like a nice little demo. I'll show you a couple options where you can scrape stuff from based on someone's username, a couple different usernames, or even hashtags. So I'll show some of the options for that next. Let me go back to present mode here. So I posted a video in the Slack channel yesterday or the day before on how to like sort of install this stuff. If you're on a Mac, I highly, highly encourage you to install Anaconda. Macs have like a bunch of issues involving installing Python, where if you don't install Anaconda, which is this environment tool, you'll run into a bunch of issues that will annoy the crap out of you. So I really would encourage you to follow that step. Second, I would recommend installing, this is a library that I have, which is called Dataset-tools. Basically, we'll talk about this in a little bit, but like when you download 2,000 images of various sizes and shapes, you don't want to open each one of those individually in Photoshop and crop them to squares. I recommend using this tool, and I'll walk you through how some of it works. But yeah, so like try that. Again, this is only if you're interested in sort of like playing with these things in a little bit more detail than just having me scrape stuff for you, but that's what I would recommend doing. And then lastly, you're going to install Instagram Scraper. The video covers all the process for all this. So if there's anything you need, it should be there. If anything doesn't make sense, just hit me up and ask me questions. And like I said, I'm happy to walk through a live demo of how to do this with folks if they're interested. So the really basic usage for Instagram Scraper is you just are going to type in a command in your terminal window called Instagram Scraper. You're going to add a space, and you're going to put in the person's username. Now, this only works with public users. If you are following someone who's private, you have to include some additional detail like their username or their password, or actually your username and password, sorry. It wouldn't make sense for you to have their password. But you have to be following them already. So you can't scrape publicly like private accounts. There are some options here, and we'll walk through a little bit of a demo on how to do this, but the option here is like you can scrape multiple accounts just using commas, just comma separate them. And then you can use scraping hashtags. Basically what you do is you put in the hashtag and then you pass in a dash tag at the end of it. When you do something like a hashtag, I definitely recommend adding in this other argument, which is called maximum. What that does is it says only give me 3,000 images in total. If you scrape some really popular hashtags, you can end up with 10,000 images on your computer. And they can be pretty large in size. So I definitely recommend that you don't overwhelm yourself there. So make sure you set a maximum so you're not scraping too many images at one time. Okay, so let me just run through a really quick demo of how to use the Instagram scraper. Does anyone in particular have an Instagram account they want me to scrape? Eric, should we scrape the Japanese vans one?
I was just about to ask.
Cool, perfect. All right, so let's go to Instagram. So usually what I just do is I just go to Instagram and make sure the account exists. And it was just Japanese vans, like all one word, right? Cool, so Japanese vans, there we go. Cool, so it's not a private account, so I can just scrape it using the public API. So I'm gonna grab this name, just the account name, and then, so if you never used Terminal before, this is what Terminal looks like. Everyone thinks it's like the hacker coder interface. All it is you're basically doing the same thing you would do using a GUI, and all you're doing is writing the commands using text rather than like clicking around. So in this case, the first thing I need to do is I need to use Anaconda and move into an environment, which basically has all the stuff I need installed in already. So you do that as you type in conda activate, and then it's called Instagram scraper. I usually set up my environments to be each tool that I'm using. So we're just gonna hit up Instagram scraper, and you'll see that it now changes this to say Instagram scraper here. All this is covered in the video. You don't have to know this part, but just to let you know, like you do want to set this up so you can use it, and it'll save you a little bit of headache going forward. Okay, so now that we are ready, I'm just gonna grab this window here real quick and resize it so I can see you guys. Okay, so we're now set up here. So now we can just type in Instagram scraper. And then we're gonna pass in the name, which is Japanese vans. Now, one thing I should note is depending on where you run this command from, so this is in a folder called Datasets Tools. This will just download those images directly into that folder. So I'm actually gonna do one thing here first. I'm gonna change my folder. This just changes it to your home folder. So when you do the CD and tilde, that says change directory to your home folder. So I'm into my home folder. So now I'm going to type in Instagram scraper, and I'm going to just paste in Japanese vans. And now it's searching. So this is just like now it's going to the internet. It's searching for this account and it's going to start downloading them. So see it, it also downloads the profile pic in case you need it. I don't really know why you would, but just in case. And now it's downloading images. So you're seeing it's downloading, it's up to 51. You'll see it takes about 3 seconds per download. So on a big, on an account that has something like, thousands upon thousands of images, it might take you an hour or so to download all these images. In this case, it's happening pretty quickly. I think there's also only 322 posts, so I wouldn't expect more than like 500 images in this account. So if I go to my account here, and you'll see that now the Japanese vans has showed up. So if I click in here, you'll see it's downloading stuff. So there's a bunch of, they always download JPEGs, and they always download whatever image gets uploaded. So here are all of our vans. So as you're looking through this, I'm already seeing like, okay, some of these have interior shots, and I probably don't need interior shots because I probably just want all the exterior van shots. So that might be the first thing that I have to like start to think about is how to clean this up. So while this is running, we can just take a look at it. One thing to note is that also every once in a while you get videos. You will want to delete those. You can't really do anything with video unless you were to like somehow turn those into still frames. Let's see what this video does. Cool. Some campfire, other things, probably stuff you don't want to use. There is a way in Instagram scraper to actually remove those. I never remember what it is. So let's just find out what it is here. So this is the account that manages the Instagram scraper code. And at the bottom here is a list of options. So this is what we're using, right? So we saw there was already that maximum. So you can pass in maximum and then change the amount up. There's also, what is it in here? So I'm looking for is media types. So if I do -- media -types, and then I can choose, I can say image, video, story. You can download stories. Again, I think you need to be following them. And in order to download stories, you need to also pass in a username and a password. One thing to note is that when you pass in a username and password, that is shown in plain text on your terminal. I don't think they do anything illegal with those username and passwords, but it does get passed through the system. So I might recommend that just for your own security purposes, you change your password either after using this or like change it, use it, and then change it back to something else, just for your own sanity. I also have two-factor authentication turned on my Instagram account, and that also helps protect your account. So, practice good security measures when using these things. I've seen a lot of people use this tool, but like, I don't know what this person is doing or storing with these information. So make sure you're just being safe about that sort of stuff. So there are a lot of options here. You can change the media types. A lot of times what I'll just do is I'll just download it. And then as I go through, I'll just delete images or videos or things I don't want. So just be aware of those issues. Let's see. Cool, so this finished downloading. It gave me 323 pieces of media. That took maybe like 5 minutes at most. And if I go through here, I can start to see what it produced. So lots of JPEGs. Looks like a total of 461 files, which is cool. Like that's like gets me about halfway to where I need to be. So we'll look at, and the next step we'll look at like how to use dataset tools to like clean some of this up. One thing you'll find with Instagram in particular is that like a lot of big accounts will publish the same images over and over again. Like they find out what images like get good engagement or whatever, and they'll repost them. We don't really want duplicates in our data sets, so like we have to find ways to dedupe them. There are some tools that I have that will help dedupe, but it's not always perfect. I'll talk about that in just a minute, but just be aware that like some of this stuff is a little messy. Now, Eric, there was also a hashtag we could use for Japanese vans, is that right?
Yes.
Cool, so let's look at that really quickly. So we're just gonna hit up. So when you hit up in terminal, it gives you the last command you used. So we're gonna do Japanese vans and we're gonna do --tag. And then I don't expect it to be that many images for this, but I'm just gonna type in maximum. I'm gonna set to a maximum of 1,000 just to sort of limit what we get. So this is now scraping the hashtag, right? Since we have the tag command here, whereas this was just scraping just the account. So I'm gonna hit enter again. And this is again going to download all of these images into a folder on my desktop or in my home folder. Let's see if it runs. Just still searching for posts. I should go to Instagram and just make, I'm sure they exist, but just to be safe. So it does say there's 5,000 posts. So this should be a lot more images. So I could go in here and Eric, this may be what I recommend we do later is just to like, let's try to grab all 5,000 just to sort of see what we get. Okay, this is now downloading. This seems to be downloading a lot slower. That might be because it's hashtags, so it's a little bit harder for it to search and find all these things. I don't actually know what this does behind the scenes. I don't know if it's hitting an Instagram API or if it's actually just using Beautiful Soup and scraping this particular web page, but it is there. So you'll see there's lots more vans we're going to get out of this. I don't know why this is running so slow. Oh, interesting. Okay, I didn't really think this was going to happen. This is downloading it to the same folder, which is fine. It's actually probably more preferable because if there are file names of the same type, it's just going to overwrite them. So we won't get as many duplicates. So this is probably fine, this is working this way. Yeah, and this is just running. So I'll let this run for a little bit longer behind the scenes while we talk about some other stuff. And then Eric, you and I can touch base later to figure out how to get you these files. Yeah, so this is how easy it was to do Instagram scraping. There's clearly some setup and installation that I didn't show you that's in that video. I would expect it to take you about 20 to 30 minutes to get everything installed, just because downloading Anaconda from the web is like, it's like a couple gigabytes of a file. So it'll take a little bit of time, but I think the video is about 20 minutes long. And if you follow the steps step by step, you should be fine. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. Again, if you want to do that yourself, you're more than welcome to. If you don't feel comfortable or just don't want to, like, just let me know and we can talk about like if I can scrape stuff for you and put it up on a Google Drive file for you. So this is all optional. Like, there's no requirement for you to do scraping, but I know some of you were interested in that topic. So if you are interested in doing this, feel free. If you also want to try Flickr or other scraping sites, I do have more videos on my YouTube page that are available. It'll all basically be the exact same process about installing some stuff and then Flickr is a little bit harder because you have to get some API keys. But again, all that is described in the video. And again, if you don't want to do it, just hit me up and we can talk through it. So that's basic scraping. Unfortunately, that is not the end of making your own data set. Like that's just the beginning. Now you've got lots of cool images, but now you have to figure out what to do with all of them, right? So as we went through here, you know, you'll see, okay, that's cool that like, this is vans. This is a part that is not a van. Like, you know, so it's like, I have to decide, do I want to delete this by hand? Are there like automated ways I can delete this? In most cases, for most of you, I would recommend just deleting stuff by hand. So if you're going to download 5,000 images, it's going to take you a little bit of time to go through each image and one by one decide, you know, do I want this? Do I not want this? That sort of thing. There's a video. I probably will go back through the tag sample and actually like decide not to show video. That'll save me just a little bit more time to clean up stuff. Also, there's some black and white images. There's some color images. What do I want to do? Like now we get into like the curatorial part of like, how do I want to curate this? And how do I want to curate these samples? Do I want only beautiful vans, or do I have a specific type of van that I want to look for? This is sort of like now the next step of your dataset tool prep. So this is where I have some tools, and I'll walk us through sort of how this works. I have some tools that I think will help us like sort of clean this stuff up a little bit more. So let's walk through like a quick example of how this works. So my steps for what I do is, one, I sort of try to look and see how many images I have that are of a certain resolution. So what I talked about is like for StyleGAN, preferably of 1024 by 1024. Instagram's square images are 1080 by 1080 when they were uploaded. That changed 2 or 3 years ago. So prior to that, I believe all the images were like 680 by 680 or something. They're pretty small. So I have a tool that will actually allow you to like sort and sift through all the image resolutions. So if you only want high res stuff, if you're starting with 5,000 images, you can sort them, see if you get down to 1,000 or whatever. And if you get lower than that, you might have to like change your resolution size or whatever you're gonna do. Like I mentioned, there will often be, especially on Instagram or on Google, there'll be duplicate images. Those duplicate images are not always just the exact same image. So you can't just like look at the name of the file, or you can't just open them. They may be slightly different, right? A lot of people, what they'll do is they'll take a screenshot of a photo they already posted to Instagram and then upload that screenshot. And that has a different compression level. So like I wrote this like crazy script to help do some matching with that. So there is a script within this dataset tools library that will help you dedupe stuff. You can try that. It doesn't always work perfectly, but it does work. And then lastly, you do need to hand curate. So like, as I mentioned, like going through that image data set, found some stuff of things that weren't vans, found some videos, found some, you know, van parts, but not vans, or interiors versus exteriors. Like at the end of the day, you do end up doing hand curation with this stuff, and that takes a lot of time. So, you know, give yourself some time. Next week, we're going to walk through the steps of training, but it's not like required that you train stuff next week. It also takes about 8 hours to do a full training session. So if by next week your data set isn't finished, that's fine. We'll walk through it a little bit. I'll walk through the steps to do training next week, but you don't have to have your data set ready by then. But do know that hand curation takes some time. So like be prepared to like do a little bit of work. It can take, a couple hours, or can take a whole day depending on what you're curating and how many images you have to work with. The last step is one that is optional. I'll talk about this at the very end about why you would want to do your own cropping versus Runway does allow you to do image cropping in its own tool, like it'll auto crop stuff. And that may be good for you, but I'll show you some examples of where you might want to actually either manually hand crop or use the dataset tool library to do some cropping. So let's walk through this. I'll sort of like give you a simple example. I really like the account of BoneBone29. I don't know if anyone else is a BoneBone fan. It is a very cute cat, I believe, from Thailand. Lots of really adorable, fluffy photos of this cat. It also has a really cool backpack. So I want to get the backpack in my data set. So when I did an Instagram scrape of BoneBone's account, I got 2,089 images. And I was like, perfect, this is gonna be great. This is a big data set for me. I'll be able to make a lot of really cool pieces from this. Then I wanted to sort this, and I said, I only really want images that are 1024 or larger. So when I ran this command, and this is the command I ran in my dataset tool library, all of a sudden I got down to 1,130 images. So a lot of these images were low res. Now, ideally I want about 750 to 1,000 images. So this is still okay, right? I can kind of work with this still. But then I started to look manually through the images, right? And it's like, well, I've got these like weird, like sort of like grid images, and I don't really want to include that in my data set, right? Because any image you include in your data set is going to essentially influence the data set itself and influence the training, right? So if I had enough of images of this, I might end up start to see like multiple images of bone, which is really not what I want. I want one image of bone. I want just one face in bone or whatever. So I would just have to start thinking about how to delete these. There's also photos of bone with, I don't know if this is a celebrity or just a fan, but you know, there's also photos of other people. So I have to figure out like, what do I do with this? And this is the hardest part of anything, especially with Instagram. You know, prior to like 3 or 4 years ago, they uploaded really low res images. So only recently have we gotten HD images. So it's just made things a little bit harder. Now you do have the option, if let's say this got down to 500, you do have the option of training a smaller data set. You could train 256 or 512. I don't really recommend the 512 for a couple of reasons we'll get into next week, but you could train it smaller, or your other option is to actually just res up the images. So let's say I got this down to 500, but I started with 2000. I could just take that other 1500 and bring them into Photoshop and res them up. They're gonna be a little blurry, but I've found that it doesn't affect the model too much. It does include that blur. So your model will be a little bit blurry, but it will still give you like an accurate example of things. So this is kind of where it's up to you, like how much, you know, how much data can you get versus what sort of like process do you want? My recommendation for you is to like try to hit about that 1,000 mark. Because anything lower than 1,000, you run into issues, which we'll talk about next week. So even if it has to be a little bit blurry, I would try to hit the 1,000 mark. Just because you'll get better results. I would also say, like, since this is for all of you, I believe, your first time training, a data set of slightly blurry images is better than no data set at all. So don't think too much about high quality at the moment, just try to get the data. And if you find you really enjoy the process or you really like the model you made, you can always try to get high res data or like more images at a later date and retrain it. That's always a possibility. So we'll talk a little bit more about retraining next week, but that is a possibility as well. So my argument would be like, try to get to 1,000 images, even if they're not perfect images, because you'll get slightly better results out of that. So continuing this process along, I've now removed all my small images. I'm at 1,000. If I want to remove duplicates, of which there were a couple, like there were this chubby little kitty, there were a couple of these images, I removed them. All of a sudden I got, 2 or 3 images less. So that started to be good. Then I had to go in and hand curate. So this is a case of where like, you might think that these 2 images are duplicates, but if you actually open up them in Photoshop and like, do a difference filter or whatever, you'll find they're just slightly different images. Or maybe this is a case of where the person who uploaded them screen capped them and then just reposted them. So this is a case of where like you have to go do some hand curation. You have to go through and cut out a bunch of images. So when I did that on this model, you'll see I end up with about 1,000 images. You'll see I had some stuff where it was like, I've got a paw. I want a face. I want Bone's cute face, not necessarily the paw. Again, there were these photos of crowds who were like, all wanted photos of Bone, but I didn't really want this in my data set. There was obviously like a mustache day where they were adding mustaches to Bone. I wanted the raw, the pure Bone, so I decided to cut this out as well. So hand curation takes time. You will lose images in your data set. I thankfully got this down to about 1,000 still, so it was still a usable, workable data set. And lastly, now I need to think about cropping to square. So here's a case of where I've got a bunch of images here of Bone's face, and the default version that happens in Runway is that it crops the square from the center. So these 2 images are still working pretty well, right? I get a decent chunk of Bone's body here. I might end up with a minion inside of my data set, but pretty highly unlikely because we've got 1,000 images. This image is great. This image is really where I run into problems, right? I want Bone's face, but if I just center crop a rectangular image, I'm gonna lose Bone's eyes and just like have a little bit of a nose and a mouth. So that's not ideal for me. So again, inside of the dataset tools library, there is a way to crop from the top. You just pass in these different commands and it will crop from the top of an image rather from the center. This is one option. You'll see like this image is better, this image is better. This one, so-so, again, the minion stayed in, I lost Bone's feet, and I now have a person in there. So again, doing this stuff with scale, like trying to do this on 1,000 images it becomes a challenge of like, do I want to do those all manually and get the perfect crop with each one of my images, which might take me hours? Or do I just want to run the command once? Running this command once will take about 10 minutes to process. And I want to just deal with the results. So again, there's always this like quality versus time trade-off. Now, there are some other options that I could use with inside of the datasets tool library. So because these are rectangles, maybe instead of cropping to square, I actually want to, oh, I don't actually have an example of this. I have an example of this in another file if someone's interested, but I could actually mirror the edges. So what would actually happen is you take the rectangle and you pad the sides and you get a square out of that, and then you mirror the edges, or you can stretch the edges. You can do a bunch of different things. I think with these images that would work fine, in part because what you would get is just like more ear reflection, or because these aren't like super narrow images, it wouldn't show too much of the edges. But there are some options as well to think about like what you could do. Another option I've seen people do is, let's say they only have rectangular images. Like let's say they're all like 4x3s and they're all like, you know, of the exact same shape or whatever. You can add white borders or like color borders to the edges. The model will learn those edges, but if you're to then take that model and just recrop it down when you output images, that also works. So there's a lot of different techniques you can use around cropping. Just know that the Runway models do require you to use square images. So Runway's default will be to scale up the image to whatever size it needs to be, and then crop to a center square from the center. So if you find that you have like a lot of bad images in your data set, when using that process, you might want to do some custom cropping, either using my tools or even going in by hand and doing them in Photoshop. So this is essentially the process of data sets. This is why it takes forever to build these things. It is an arduous process, but I also find that you get really, really great results in the end. So think about what you want to pull from, and I'm also happy to help walk people through stuff or help with, I won't help you do any of the dataset tool stuff, just because that is like very time consuming. Or like I'm happy to help if I can, but I usually find that to be very time consuming. So I'm going to ask that you hand curate your stuff. I'm happy to scrape stuff for you, but you'll have to do the curation and those sort of things yourself. If you do have issues installing dataset tools or anything, just let me know. That video that I linked to at the very beginning, which I will link to in our class notes as well, there is like basically the process to install those things. I don't think you need a GitHub account to install stuff from GitHub. I think you can just install it. If you do, if someone finds out that is the case, let me know. There may be a way around that, but basically like, they see you go to a GitHub account and grab some code and then download it. It should be fairly straightforward, but I also like am aware that I've done this stuff for a while now. So for everyone I know, it might be a little different. So that's it for class. Your homework for the next week is to get a hold of a data set. So again, you can make your own, you can download one, you can scrape your own. If you don't care about this process, but you do want to have a data set and you do want to play with training, I don't expect that to be true for anyone in this class, but if that is true for you, just let me know. I have data sets I can send you that you can work with if you're interested in playing with them. Yeah, just let me know. We'll be covering training in Runway next week. That will be the entire class. It is a lot of steps, but it is fairly straightforward, I believe. And once you've sort of followed me going through it, I think you'll be able to do it yourself. One thing to note is, and I think I mentioned this in the very first week of class, you will get one free training with your Runway account up to 3,000 steps. We'll talk about steps next week, but you get one free account or one free training. If you want to do more than one training, you do need to buy a plan. Other plans, I believe, are like $15 a month. I think it's probably worth it, especially if you even just want to do one plan or one training, because 3,000 steps isn't really enough. I generally recommend 6,000 to 10,000 steps. So you might want to look into that. Unfortunately, I can't grant you a pass through this class, so you'll have to pay those $15. Let me know if that's an issue for anyone. I'm happy to figure out another way to help you out with those sort of things if possible. But I do know that I had people in my last class who were like, I'm only going to do training once, and then they end up training like 5 different models. They got really, really into it. So just be aware that it's worth it if you're going to do a couple trainings. If you're not, you maybe just want to maybe start with the free one and just see how it goes. I also say the monthly plan, they have a monthly and a yearly plan. The yearly is like $100 a year or something, and the monthly is $15 a month. They're actually very flexible on stopping that every month. So if you just want to turn it on for the month that you have this class, or for the next couple weeks, you can always turn it off after. Just remember to turn it off. If you don't, like, they will keep charging you. You will see credit card charges for this thing. Yeah, so getting a hold of a data set is the main thing. If maybe training isn't really your thing, or maybe you just haven't gotten a chance this week to really dig into some of these models, please feel free to keep exploring models. You're also welcome to share work, again, in the Slack channel. If you have an idea for a data set and you don't know where to find it, I definitely recommend just posting it in either our class Slack channel or in the Datasets channel on Slack, because you will get, there are people who are, hanging out that might be like, oh, I know an Instagram account, or, oh, I know this weird website that has stuff. So if there is something you're looking for, even if it's just like, I have 600 images and I just need another 300, like, there may be people who can help you find things. So just definitely reach out to me or anyone on Slack. People are always willing to help out if they can. But you're definitely welcome to reach out to me if I can help anyway. Cool. All right. So at this point, we've got about half an hour of class left. If you have questions or if you want to talk about data set stuff, I'm happy to keep talking about it. But I also am aware this week has been absolutely crazy. And if you need to duck out just for your own mental health, please feel free to.
Derek, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
I have a book that a friend gave me, and it's consists of like black and white coat of arms, just like, black and white illustrations. Can you point us in a direction that if we decide to scan these resources to kind of, I know a lot of it's just manual labor, it sounds like, but are there resources to, for help in automation? Like, you have a folder and.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll look around. I generally do a lot of stuff manually at that point, but in terms of like straightening or cropping, there may be some tools that will like auto crop or auto straighten things. I'll take a look around and just sort of see what's out there. Yeah, scanning books is definitely hard. It's like a painful process. So definitely one of the harder ones. Yeah.
So along that note, following up on Eric's question, let's say a way to circumvent scanning. What if you set your like iPhone to a square photo and you're just going through and carefully taking square photos of each image versus scanning? Is it going to be wildly different as long as your lighting's okay with like the quality that it probably will affect it some, but
yeah, I mean, it's it's like an iPhone camera is. I also find that because iPhone cameras are so high res now, that when you scale them down to 1024, they always end up looking sharpish, right? So unless you take a really, really blurry photo, that probably works fine. I might recommend that you like see if you can find like either like a faux copy stand kind of thing to give you a little bit more stability or that sort of thing. That might help too. Because I also know with like the burst setting or just like the video, wherever it's like it's kind of a slight video and it's like you never know what great image you get. Taking 1,000 photos regardless on an iPhone is still a process. So it definitely could work. And if you find other results that like help you make that happen quicker, like I would love to know, because I'm sure other people in the class would also be interested. But yeah, you can do that. Yeah, you gotta make sure your lighting works. You like if it's a glossy book, you gotta watch out for those gloss spots, like those sort of things. It's a challenge no matter what. So yeah.
Cool.
Looks like you have a lot of books behind you to grab from. So.
Yep.
Cool. Anyone else have ideas or questions about data sets?
One more. So say if you like put together a decent data set, do you recommend like if we wanted to make it public, putting it into the Slack channel for data sets?
Yeah, if you want to, you're more than welcome to put it there. Just know that usually that means you have to find a place to host it, which could mean download sizes, those sort of things. If you do have a data set that you want to make public, like I'm also happy to like, I've got some public ones that I have on I just paid for like the 2 terabyte Google Drive folder or whatever. So I can also share stuff through there, and they have decent download requirements without like, they'll shut it off after a while. But in my experience, no one downloads these, like, it's not like you're going to get 1,000 people downloading it overnight. It's usually pretty fine. So yeah, you're more than welcome to. I'll also say like, I'll talk about this like sort of toward the end of class. the models you train out of these are also like very valuable to other people. So if after you finish training a model, you want to share that model, there are sites where you can share those models as well. You can also make it public inside Runway. I'll talk about that more toward the end of class, but like definitely think about that. If you do want to share this with the community, you're more than welcome to. While I'm thinking about it, there's a couple other things to keep in mind when you do data sets. Now, again, for this class, like I'm sort of saying, just do whatever, because that's actually pretty hard in the next 2 weeks anyway. But if you do want to go sort of like advanced mode level or just like expert level, things to keep in mind are where things align. So in the case of something like a face model, what people have found works really well is if all the eyes are aligned perfectly. So if you think about this, like what the model trains on is the data you provide it in the exact format you provide it in. So if your eyes are like shifting up and down, you will actually see in the model when you train it and when you produce an animation that the faces will also shift up and down. So how you align stuff can have a dramatic effect on where things happen. So in the case of like something like a van, let's say all your van shots are the side of a van. You might want to align the floor or like whatever the wheels are to match all the time, because then when you get that video where it morphs, you don't want it to like shift up and down or do weird. You want it to sort of like shift as little as possible. That is really, really hard to do with a lot of these data sets, or especially with small data sets. But that is one thing to think about, is that you might want to think about like where stuff aligns. Other techniques that I've heard that work well is even, let's say you get to like 700 images total. I believe the default setting for Runway is to also do mirrored images. So sometimes you can also mirror your images and get more data out of it, right? So in the case of something like a face, if you mirror someone's face, it's pretty symmetrical and that's not gonna feel that different. Whereas if you mirror a van, that won't really work as well, because then you're gonna have a van where like the one side is gonna be the front, one side is gonna be the back, and you don't want it to say those are the exact same thing. So depending on your data set, you may be able to mirror some data and get more out of it that way. Another technique is what we call augmentation. That's a technique where you can actually like do some, depending on how big the images are, you can zoom in a little bit more and do a square crop of that, and zoom out and do a square crop of that. Those are all sort of advanced level stuff. If you're feeling like you're low on number of images in your data set, like I'm happy to talk through like how we could pad that a little bit. But I'd say for now, like don't worry too much about that stuff. But if you are interested in it, I have more resources to do some things like that. Joe, George, Matt, any questions? Sorry, we're a small class now, so I'm just gonna start calling on people.
You know, I was looking at this Instagram page the other day that is all old school NYC storefronts, and they seem to be a little all over the place, but it was something I was thinking about, and I was just looking for the link right now and I couldn't find it, but when I do, I'll post it for you.
Yeah.
I'd be curious to get your opinion on it and see if that's something that could work.
It's definitely something I think could work. Again, we might want to look at alignment or, those sort of things. I had a student last class that did all NYC doors, like different types of doors. So being from like, modern buildings to, the old, like, brick storefront sort of buildings, like different types of doors, which is pretty cool. Especially nice right now because none of us are allowed to really travel in New York. So it's nice to have a little like fake model we can watch animate and sort of feel nostalgic for it. Yeah, stuff like that is really cool for sure.
Okay. Yeah, I'll find the link. It's somewhere.
Okay, awesome.
I was looking at a video of how to scrape Alibaba, the website, for products, and I still haven't like fully started doing that, but I know it's a little bit more complicated. But I was wondering if there's like any other available ones for like other big stores or like.
Yeah, interesting. I think I've seen one for Amazon as well. I tried to scrape Amazon once. The problem with those again is like, you might get the exact, so I tried to scrape TV screens or something. And the problem was that like every listing was for the exact same TV, but with slightly different specs, but the photographs are all the same. So you end up in a place where you end up with tons of multiple images. So that would be my only thing to make you aware of, is that you might have a lot more like work to do on the backside, even once you've scraped all that data. And I feel like Alibaba has the same deal, right? Where it's like, there's like 50 different sellers all selling the exact same thing, and they all use the exact same stock photo. So just be aware of that. That's not to like say you shouldn't do it, but just to say like, there will be a lot of cleanup work to do with stuff like that. I would also say, like, you know, in the case of like what the scraping thing I did with Matthew, there's probably also like, I'm sure we could create a scraper for like Walmart or other stores. So if there's a particular store you have in mind, let me know and we can take a look at it and see how hard it would be. Now that I like, so actually when I started this class, I wanted to do like a Nike shoe collection of all of Nike's shoes, because they have like really high res photos on their website. And I want to go back and actually run a scraper for that, because they have really nice photography as well. So maybe I probably can't get to it this week, but I might try to do that. So anyway, if there's stores, like, let me know. I'm happy to try to help you write some scraper stuff. Because that's also like, again, I would love to share that with other folks in the community as well, because that's going to help them too. So even if you're scraping a certain thing with an Alibaba, other people might be scraping other things. So cool.
Derek, really quick, for George, I think the account he was looking for is James and Carla spelt with a K. Sorry.
Cool.
No, that's it. Yeah, I knew it was 2 names, so thanks for
That's
that.
awesome.
Yeah.
And there's probably, I've got to imagine there's like a lot of, the other thing I would recommend, so like no one uses Flickr anymore, but like back in the day, everybody used Flickr, right? So like if you go to Flickr, like there's a ton of stuff in there. And the Flickr scraper isn't the hardest thing to work with, but the nice thing about it is you get really, really high res images. Like a lot of times I'll get like 4,000 by 4,000 pixel images. So sometimes it's worth like digging around in there and just sort of seeing what's there. You know, you can just use their search parameters and sort of find some nice stuff. So Instagram is the one everyone uses today, but like kind of stuck with what their limitations are. But Flickr has a lot of nice things if you're ever interested in just sort of digging through what's there. And I know there's a lot of like history accounts that like upload to Flickr as well. Matthew, anything you're working on besides the tartan patterns?
No, that's the only thing I was thinking of this week.
Cool.
I want to dive in though.
Yeah, cool. Record covers also happen to be square. I see them all behind you. And I think I mentioned this last week, but I think I saw a death metal. There's a death metal style game model. I'm gonna make a note to myself to dig that one up. This is pretty interesting. It definitely has the colors of death metal, but it's still like really blobby. Do you guys know the website Ganbreeder? If you don't, okay, so let me share my screen really quickly. So Ganbreeder is also a really really cool tool that is sort of like Runway. Oh, is it called ArtBreeder now? It used to be called Ganbreeder. That's why I don't remember that it changed its name. But it's basically a tool that allows you to sort of play with different. So these are style GAN models that this guy by the name of Joel Simon has sort of like begun to train on. So you can start to play with a bunch of them. So it might be also worth just like digging in here and just sort of playing around and sort of seeing if anything inspires you based on what you see in there. I actually haven't used this in like a while now. I think he built out a bunch of different new sort of tools. So the big thing right now is there's a lot of personas. There was a fairly controversial project that someone did all these persona models recently that has sort of been blowing up the internet. So you'll see a lot of furry pictures. I know the internet gets weird, man. There's lots of weird stuff that people get into. So ArtBreeder has a bunch of options. And so there's also a lot of like famous photo. Someone like obsessed with this Game of Thrones person. Anyway, this is getting into the dark internet. This could become not safe for work very quickly. But anyway, Ganbreeder is a cool tool to play with. You can see lots of stuff like you can play with like forking some of these images and like building new things off them. There's just a lot of stuff to play with. So you can always play with these too and sort of see if you find anything cool that inspires you. There is also, let me pull up this really quickly. A developer by the name of Justin Pinkney has So this is the model. This is what I was talking with Eric when Eric asked about making these public. This is a set of models that are pre-trained. So there already exists some of these models that you can play with. So there's a car model, there's a cat model. So these are pre-trained models. So if you ever want to bring any of these models, if they're not already in Runway, let me know. I can bring one of these into Runway very quickly and very easily for folks. So if you see anything in here that you're interested in playing with, let me know. I actually gave them one of the models that I trained for my last class, which is this one. It's this abstract art model. So you can also, when you're done with class, you can, he has a form where you can just upload like basically a link to the file and then some info about the file. And he'll add it to his repo for you to download from. So there's some cool, weird stuff in here, maybe some other ideas around stuff that people have done that you might want to do other things of. Lots of people I know do like these microscope images that have some pretty cool stuff in them. I think someone in a previous class did both trained it on a mix of two things, which is microscope images and celestial images. So sort of like the powers of 10, like both like microscopic and huge. But because they look pretty similar, it created this really interesting model. So you could also think about like, I don't really recommend trying to combine two things unless they have a similar visual aesthetic. But you could think about doing something like that as well. I'll add a link to these things in our class notes. So if there's nothing else, we can wrap up class a little bit early. Like I mentioned, I will be doing a second version of this class for a couple of folks who wanted to skip out and take some mental health time this week. So I'll post a note in the Slack channel when we decide to do that class. So if you need a refresher or you just want to hang out, you're more than welcome to. Like I said, you're always welcome to reach out to me on Slack. Like if you're like, I've found 500 images and I don't know how to get them, like just let me know. Or like, oh, I want to do something with this. Do you know where I can find some images? We can just dig around and sort of see what's available. So please don't feel like you have to figure this out all on your own. I'm happy to work with people. I would also say that if you want to, I know I linked to this in the previous, or like mentioned this previously. There's another Slack channel from the previous class that is called Runway ML Deep Dive. Lots of people have posted examples of work that they've done in there. And you're always welcome. It's a public channel, so you're welcome to dig in. People might have also posted like some examples of things that they've made. So for example, someone, I think with their kid or with their kids, they did Animal Crossing. So they just took screenshots of Animal Crossing images and then put it in this like cool little video. So there's lots of different examples in here. So if you just want to dig through, my guess is that most of the folks will be willing to share data sets with you if you're interested in that as well. But just sort of see what's in there. Yeah, so if there's no more, oh, this is the example of the doors. So this is April's work working with doors. Some pretty cool examples here. Yeah, so have at it, dig through it. Again, you're always welcome to reach out to me. And I just want to reiterate, times are definitely weird and times are definitely tough for everybody right now. So if at any point you feel like you need a break from class or whatever, just let me know. And I'm happy to work with you one-on-one or do other things to make sure that you're feeling like you have the space you need to be able to take care of yourself. Cool? All right. I will see everybody next week then. And yeah, please reach out to me before then if you're going to work on a data set. Cool?
Thank you, Derek.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Derek. Appreciate it.
Yep. Bye.